I do feel like the emotional element is often ignored, right? Where it's like, oh, it doesn't need to be funny or witty. It's a B2B. It's boring marketing. And I could not disagree with that less.
You're listening to the Revenue Driven CMO, the podcast where we break down the most effective growth strategies from top marketing leaders. Join us every week as we dive into their stories, challenges, and insights that drive revenue. This show is brought to you by Level Agency, where AI-enabled performance marketing expertise blends the art and science of marketing to deliver measurable results.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Revenue Driven CMO. I'm your host, Chris Mechanic, here with a very exciting guest that I can't wait to get into it with. She came up as an e-commerce general manager with a proven track record of success in driving real growth through innovation, through leadership, and just incredible marketing savvy. She has experience owning multi-billion-dollar P&Ls, that's billion with a B, building them up, scaling them, and really just operating businesses. Everything from like long-term strategic planning to negotiations to product development. She did a long stint at Amazon, like over 10 years at Amazon, and as a person who's worked with various Amazon teams, I can tell you that's an intense environment. It's like an amazing place to grow. But she is now CMO at Pattern, which is a really, really interesting company that I can't wait to dive deeper into in the e-commerce acceleration space. So I'm super excited for this episode. You're going to love it. And welcome to the show, Miss Carolyn Sarnoff. How are you, Carolyn?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Likewise, super duper excited. So let's dive right in. Tell us, you've had an amazing career. You've accomplished so much. What is one of your biggest secrets to success in marketing?
So, I actually call this my secret to success, I would say, outside of marketing, and it applies very much, and that is really having empathy. I think if you want to influence people, and that is what I think success comes down to in any form, it is all about really understanding where is somebody at and what are they dealing with, right? Like what problems are they trying to solve, whether that's professionally or personally, and coming at that conversation in a way that shows that you really understand what they're going through. And so from a marketing perspective, I think showing empathy and kind of an understanding of like the challenges that someone is going through, that's going to help your messaging resonate so much better. I think as a person, right, if you stop to say like, hey, these are people I'm working with and they might be going through something. Who knows? They might be celebrating something. They might be mourning something. But I think taking the time to say like, hey, what's going on with you? And like, just recognizing people as people, I think gets you a lot further than just saying, let's get down to business all the time, all day, every day. So that for me has been huge. And it's funny how often people say like, wow, you're like a real person. And I'm like, I sure am. Like,
So,
I actually don't know how that surprises you so much, but like, thank you. Oh.
Right. Yeah. And I like that you blended it into everyday life too, right? Because that really goes a long way. I mean, think about at the restaurant, being kind to the servers or the host, can oftentimes get you, an extra drink on the house or get you accelerated seating. Like if there's a wait, how do you do it in marketing? So like there's obviously a lot of different activities involved in marketing, from planning to, building campaigns and activating and tracking and all these things. Like when you sit down at work and you're thinking about a new campaign, like how is it that you are injecting empathy into it, like from a marketing perspective?
Yeah, such a good question. And if you don't mind, I'm going to take a little bit of a step back, which is how I actually got into this role. Do you mind if I go off on a little bit of a tangent?
Please, I love tangents.
So, I have not actually spent my entire career in B2B marketing. My first job out of college, I was super lucky. I kind of stumbled in the door at Salesforce in a recruiting role, but I got to spend 2 years working for the CMO. I went to business school. I ended up at Amazon, which is very much a general management career path. You talked a little bit about my background in the beginning, but I got to work with some really, really incredible brands at Amazon. But I was doing everything from, negotiations to assortment, to inventory management, to the P&L management. And what I loved about that was, again, working with some really awesome consumer brands. The very cool thing about Amazon is how customer focused it is, right? Like they talk all the time about putting customer first. And, one of their values is being customer obsessed. Um, but that doesn't always mean that they were, brand obsessed. And so I got to see kind of firsthand, like, hey, we have these incredible brands. And they had a lot of challenges. It's hard to be a brand selling on e-commerce marketplaces. And it just wasn't necessarily what Amazon was prioritizing solving for. And so as I thought about the next step of my career, one of the reasons I was so interested in coming to Pattern is because Pattern is that advocate for a brand. They're like, okay, we get it. E-commerce is so easy for consumers. It's actually really hard. That experience, it feels so magical. Box with a click of a button, a box shows up at your step. It feels so easy and so intuitive. It's really, really hard for brands. And Pattern is all about solving that problem and making it easier for brands to navigate that complexity. And so I guess that's a long way of saying I do not bring, 13 years of B2B marketing experience, but what I do bring is a very deep understanding of the challenge that Pattern is looking to solve. And so what I've had to do in this role, to some extent, as I've sat down and, whether it's creating a campaign or whatever it is, to some extent, I have to rely on other people with a lot of deep expertise there. But what I can bring is say, like, hey, a brand is going through annual vendor negotiations with Amazon right now. Like that is so annoying. It's like they probably can't, they're getting asked for terms concessions and they probably can't even get somebody on the other end of the phone to pick up, right, and answer their questions. And so as we start to think about our content, we do webinars with kind of Amazon experts who now work at Pattern who can say, hey, I was on the other end of that negotiation. Like, hey, want to come ask me questions, right? So I think what I am sitting down to bring is saying, hey, what is going on right now for our target audience? And how can we provide content? How can we answer those questions and make them feel like they have someone who gets it and someone who can help them, whether or not they choose to partner with us, like to feel like, hey, we showed up for them at a time when they felt like they needed, an advocate or a support or an ally. Like we were there ready to kind of offer that advice. So that was a bit long-winded, but I thought that was important context.
Yeah, well, it's almost like you experienced the pain firsthand. And so it's relatively easy for you to have that empathy. That's kind of what I heard. But it's so smart because it's like, people can tell whether you're truly empathetic to their situation or whether you're just kind of paying lip service to it. I really believe that.
I think so too, right? I think it comes through as, you can come across as very authentic and you can come across as not authentic at all. And people definitely know, whether it's a B2B customer, whether it's a B2C consumer, people know whether you're being authentic or not. And I think that very much shows. So I think taking the time, making sure that on a marketing team or a sales team or just at your company, making sure that you do have people who either have experience with that, challenge or just have a deep passion for it. And that takes different, shapes and forms depending on what the problem is you're solving and who your target customer is. But I think having that deep understanding on a team or at a company is so incredibly important.
Super important. Yeah. And even with salespeople, like I've found in my own business, which we run an agency, we can hire amazing salespeople that like don't really know marketing and they don't do as well as like somebody who came up through like on the marketing side and is then, not really trained as a salesperson, but people just trust them because they, it's obvious that they get it and they know what they're doing.
Yeah. From a credibility perspective, right? It's like, I think, consumers, customers, they're super savvy. And so they want to spend their time engaging people that they feel like know what they're talking about, aren't just trying to sell something to them. And are they going to get value out of that conversation, whether or not there ends up being some, financial transaction between the two of them? Is this a conversation that's worth my while? And to your point, I think that comes from the expertise.
Totally. So, two questions. One is I'm wondering the extent to which you believe that there's an empathy gene, quote unquote, versus like, can you train that? And then second is like, regardless of the answer, like, how do you impart that onto your team? How do you spread your enthusiasm and your understanding and perspective and, empathy for the customers to everybody around you?
Yeah. It's such a good question. I do think that some people are probably born more naturally empathetic than others, but I certainly think it's something that can be, encouraged. And I think it's interesting. Um, you I almost feel like sometimes you have to like give permission to be super empathetic at work, right? I think there are plenty of people who are extremely empathetic humans, but they come to work and they're like, okay, do I need to be all business, right? Like, do I leave that side of my personality at home? And I just, I need to be all data or all, all business. And so I think as a leader, some of it is leading by example and saying, hey, it's okay, right? Like, yes, we have 30 minutes together, but it's okay if we spend 15 of those minutes actually just talking about what's going on with you because I care about you as a person. And I believe that, if you feel that you can show up as your authentic self, you're probably actually going to be better at your job in the long run because you feel like, you can show up and you feel comfortable and you feel supported. So I think to some extent it's making it, it's kind of setting the example that it is okay to be vulnerable at work, and that, there's kind of an expectation that we will all show up for each other because you don't know what other people are going through. But, more, I guess, in more kind of strictly work settings, I think it's really, it's always taking the time to say, okay, this campaign is really easy to get caught up in like, here's the creative, here's the copywriting, here's the target audience, here's the spend behind it. And it's interesting how often, you kind of need to say like, hey, like let's take a beat, right? It's like, what are we trying to say, right? At the end of the day, it's like for this audience that you're, speaking to, it's like, what problem are we solving for them? And how are we, how do we want to approach them? And what is going to make them interested? And what is going to make them feel like we really understand what's going on with them in a way that feels, timely, in a way that feels empathetic. And, I think it's less, and sometimes I think that is about creating value without asking for anything, right? It's just like, hey, I think we have this information and it seems like somebody in your role in your industry might find this useful, and sometimes that is at the expense of, maybe getting, making content ungated versus gated. And so maybe you are giving up, collecting new leads. But I think that kind of as you think about establishing trust in your brand and your company, I think, at least having those conversations is really, really important. Not just saying, hey, we have all these things, let's go. It's like, hey, let's take a step back and say, what are we really trying to do here? And are we speaking to our audience in a way that makes them feel like seen and understood, and not like, hey, this is very, not making them feel like it's super transactional, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think giving and providing a lot of value without getting anything in return is like applied empathy, right? Because like messaging is described empathy. It's like, we get you. Okay, do you? Right? But when you're actually creating something of value and not asking for anything in return and then over delivering on a person's expectations, then I think that really gives people the warm and fuzzies.
Totally. Totally. One of the fun things too is, so we do, we love, at Pattern, we have a lot of people who are just crazy, passionate about e-commerce and are a little bit nerdy and actually just like love geeking out and like, brand growth and e-commerce channels and e-commerce marketplaces. And so we do these 2-day events, maybe 5 or 6 times a year. And so we invite executives from different brands. And certainly those are brands that we would like to partner with. But sometimes, a brand will say, thanks for the invitation. I'm not sure that, a partnership with Pattern is the right fit. I don't know that I should come. And we're like, you know what, just come and have a conversation. If nothing else, you will get to know some awesome people. You will contribute to the conversation. Hopefully you will learn something. And again, I'm not pretending that is like completely without, motive, but, a lot of times that like, I think that lands super well where it's like, we really are just trying to create some community and a place where people can learn from each other and have a little bit of fun and get to know others who are having the same problems and challenges. So it's funny, something we do at those events is at the beginning, we say, what are your biggest pain points and like what keeps you up at night as it pertains to, e-commerce. And it's so funny because, someone will say something and you'll hear the whole room be like, oh my gosh, yes, And so sometimes as marketers, it's about creating those moments for people to feel like I'm not alone in this. Like there are other people experiencing the same thing. And whether they, choose your solution or your product to solve that problem, it's almost immaterial. It's like, hopefully they will, at least some of the time, but I think you generate a lot of goodwill and you learn a ton too from hearing people talk about what they're challenging. I think you can then take some of that feedback and make your positioning better and make your products better at the end of the day. So I think there is something to be said for a little bit of that selflessness, where it's just like, let's get people together and just get them talking about what's keeping them up at night. And it's so funny to hear people, there's just this like, people will say things and there's just this like collective groan, So
That's plenty. Yeah, I think that a good frame of mind potentially to tap into the empathy gene is to ask yourself not like, hey, how can I get 25% more leads, or how can I reduce my cost per lead by X? It's like, what can I do that would be genuinely valuable for people? If you start there, then a lot of times you'll end up getting a lot more leads but for everybody that's listening, there's probably all these things that they're doing on the marketing side, which are designed largely to acquire, to capture information. Just like think about that language: acquire, capture, conquer, right?
it's so impersonal. Yeah.
It's like, it's combative kind of, it's like, we're going to get you. And they're doing all these things and that's taking up almost all their time. But if they used, say, 10 or 20% of their time to say, okay, let's not worry about leads for right now, and just like, what can we do that would be truly valuable for folks? Like, I'm thinking about your business, right? Bringing these like executive leaders together of companies that are of similar size and stature, but are non-competitive, like that's hugely valuable. Where else, like if I own, a $20 million e-commerce store, like where else can I go to hang out with other owners of $20 million e-commerce or 50 million or whatever it is?
Yeah, totally. There's, I think the element of community building, and I think there are so many different ways to community build, right? You can do that in digital channels for sure. And, we've chosen to take this kind of more bespoke approach where it's a very small kind of curated group of people. But I think regardless of what your channel is or how you choose to do that, I think that community building is a super important part of understanding what makes your target audience tick and what they're experiencing and what they really care about, which again, like allows you then it gives you more insight into how you can create value, right? So it really starts to kind of feed that whole cycle for sure.
So tell us a little bit about the community motion. Like, how frequent is it? How do you curate the groups? Is it customers mostly or prospects or mix? Like how are you guys doing that?
Yeah. So, for that particular type of event, we do that, we'll do 5 of those events this year. And that is generally a mix of prospective brands. We usually bring in a current brand who can speak to their experience and kind of the before and after of what their business looked like working, before they worked with us and after. Oftentimes we will have kind of partners who work in other parts of the e-commerce industry. And so they, many times they're kind of thought leaders. And so they're weighing in an independent way, right? They can kind of say, yeah, like here's my take on that particular issue. And I think then that comes across as, and it's true. It's authentic. We're not trying to be entirely self-serving. And so it's nice to kind of build and kind of curate that group. One of the other really fun ways we think about building community is we do an annual conference called Accelerate. And that's something that's really open to anyone in the e-commerce industry. And so we welcome brands, and we hope that our existing brand partners will come. We invite prospective brands, but we think a lot about the content. We often have, celebrity speakers. But we say, hey, like we invite our competitors, right? Like we invite the marketplaces. So we've had speakers from Amazon and Walmart in the past, we've had folks from TikTok. So we've had other service providers. So it's really one of those things that's like very inclusive. And I think that's, and we mean that very genuinely. I think we talked a little bit about the authenticity, but it's like, we really do think that there are a number of different ways to solve, the challenges of e-commerce for brands. And we're not, obviously I'm biased and I think we do it in a really special, amazing, effective way. But it's not at the exclusion of there being other, ways to, I think I was about to say skin that cat, which I think is not a great, not a great metaphor. For me.
Package
Right.
that product.
Yeah. There are other ways of going about it. So that's a really, really fun one. And it's just, again, we're not saying you can come and you can. It's like, hey, anyone who has any role within e-commerce, whether you're a brand, whether you're a service provider, whether you're a marketplace, and again, even, competitors to us, we welcome them because we just want everyone to be part of that conversation. And we feel very strongly that it's all about, different points of view and learning from each other. So that is, I think in order to do that, it has to be, authentic to your brand. And it is for us because that's something we've built over the last, 13 years as a company. But it's a really, really fun way, I think, of doing it.
Has that ever backfired on you, like having competitors there? Like some like come in and try to poach or promote or?
No, if anything, it's actually, if anything, our CEO, when he gets on stage, I think he actually loves being able to say, this is for everyone. Even our, we give our competitors sometimes free tickets to join. So yeah, and we talk about launches and, I think we're pretty confident in what we bring to market. And so, never say never, but so far it hasn't, it's not like we're like launching big trade secrets or anything, but no, so far it's actually really kind of cool. And we have competitors say, hey, like this is, you're kind of raising the bar in this area. And there's just some very like, kind of friendly competition, which is nice. So we're all kind of challenging each other to get better and to continue to innovate. So it's fun.
That could be the title of the pod: Empathy and Why You Should Invite Your Competitors to Your Conference. No, that's really cool. One other thing. So on the smaller venue ones that you were saying you do 5 a year, is the format of that like a dinner or is it like a half day with a speaker type of thing, or what's the format?
So it's a 2-day event. And so we bring, we're a Utah-based company and, which is, we're a tech company based in Utah. There is actually a really like kind of nice and growing tech community in Utah, the Silicon Slopes, which we love being part of. But we love bringing, brands and, folks, different partners here to our backyard. We have the mountains. And so we'll often kind of gather in Deer Valley where, folks can take some time to go skiing. But we spend a lot of time doing what we call roundtable sessions, where we will bring in our executives or other experts who will kind of lead a session on a particular challenge or a particular kind of concept within e-commerce. And then, we invite discussion and debate. So it's probably a day and a half of programming. There's a bunch of time built in for just kind of networking and making casual conversation. So we'll do an activity like a skiing or an e-bike tour or something like that. So it's a nice mix of really discussion based like presentations, as well as just the networking. So it's fun. It's, I think there are people who have met at those events who like end up being like friends after, so that piece of it is really fun to see people make connections. So
yeah, there's a phenomenon happening, largely in like entrepreneurial circles called masterminds, where it's usually like, some famous Instagram influencer type person, like an Alex Hormozy or a Ty Lopez. And they're like, hey, we're doing a mastermind and here's the qualification criteria and it's paid. And generally the format is like, there's one meeting a month, which is usually a call. But then there's like 1 week out of the year, they'll do like some extravagant trip. They'll rent a mansion in Vegas or maybe in Utah, or, it's like a full week immersive with this group of peers that, you've spent the last 11 months getting to know personally and intimately. But I think that concept could be adopted in B2B. Because if you think about it, like, you know, even in our business, we have 100 clients and they're generally, like mid or upper mid-market B2Bs, and we have categories. We have like EDUs, we've got B2Bs, we've got B2Cs. There's not a lot of communities like that. And I think that, I think face-to-face and personal interaction is as important as it's ever been. But that could be a really cool, like, self-liquidating kind of lead feeder to put some of these paid masterminds together. So now you've got your salespeople, like, instead of even talking about pattern, it's like, hey, we've got this mastermind. There's going to be 12 of you. It's a chance to really talk business deeply with peers, which, like, there's not a lot of opportunities for those. The larger you are, the thinner that crowd is. But you could almost like get people to pay for that. But then on the back end, you're like, oh, by the way, sponsored by Pattern. And it's kind of an interesting idea.
It is a super, super interesting idea. But I think to your point on the kind of coming together in person, right? I think we all find that we benefit from it. And many of us probably leave those types of things feeling like so energized. And, I leave and I'm like, oh my gosh, that just filled my cup, and then you go back to your day job and your desk and you're kind of, refreshed and renewed and you're inspired and you have a lot of new ideas. But it's really hard to work into your day to day, to step away, to even go to lunch sometimes is really hard. And so it is kind of nice to say, I'm just going to take 2 days. I'm going to be out of the office and I'm really going to devote that time to this kind of networking and learning and just hearing from other people what's going on with them. It's like, I think that is it's kind of counterintuitive because it's harder to carve out 2 days and it is a lunch, but sometimes it is easier just to kind of say, I am out and I'm going to go focus on doing this thing for 2 days as opposed to trying to build it in sometimes to your day to day.
Yeah, 100%. So let's talk about your revenue engine, like more generally from, well, first off, tell us what Pattern does. I mean, let's start there.
Yeah. So Pattern's an e-commerce accelerator. And so we bring our mix of proprietary technology and in-house e-commerce expertise. And we use that to help brands grow their e-commerce businesses on marketplaces around the world. And so there are a few different ways that brands can work with us. One, we have a marketplace accelerator model, and that's where we actually buy inventory from a brand and then sell it in different marketplaces on their behalf. And so with that, we can apply our advertising technology and just, again, like our team of experts who are using our technology and are huge. We have one of the largest proprietary e-commerce data sets. We think, as far as we know, it's one of the largest. And so we use those, the combination of those things to derive insights that then inform, actions just to optimize their businesses. And so I think that, a big part of it is, like I said, the tech and the people. The other element of it is just the scale, right? Like we are the number one global seller on Amazon. And so with that, right, like we are shipping a huge number of units into Amazon, every day. It's millions of units. And so with that, our cost structure is lower. And so oftentimes we can do, we can run that business, more efficiently than a brand can on their own. But we've also taken elements of that overall accelerator and broken it into pieces. So, a brand can work with us and, employ us for fulfillment services. They can license our software for conversion and traffic. So there are a number of different ways brands can work with us, but it just, our kind of philosophy is whatever your problem is, we have a solution to help you work through it. And it's just a matter of finding the right way of working together. So
interesting. So are you working with large brands, medium brands, small brands? Like what's a typical client look like?
So we're working largely with, with large kind of enterprise brands. So we have, if you think about the logos on our website, we work with a number of brands owned by Nestle Health Sciences. We work with Tumi, we work with Kong. So it's really, kind of across the board. And so, we are marketplace and region agnostic. So brands can work with us on Amazon on Walmart. They can also work with us on, Tmall and JD and Coupang and, really anywhere in the world, which is really pretty cool. So, most brands have very small e-commerce teams. I think, a survey we did, I think it was like half of the brands we surveyed had e-commerce teams of 5 people or fewer. And when you think about all the things those people are responsible for, it's so hard. And so, we're kind of an extension of those teams, and we because of our because of our business model where we buy inventory, it's kind of like we only win when our partners win. So our incentives are super well aligned.
So you're buying inventory from the marketplaces? Like you go to Amazon and say like, hey, I'm going to buy 1 million.
We're buying it from a brand. So we would go to Kong and say, hey, we're going to buy, X, dog toys. And then if we're contracted, for example, we sell those on Amazon US, we sell those on Amazon Australia, Amazon, in Europe. And so we work with their teams there. We like to allow them to say, hey, do what you do best, right? Like create products that, customers, whether that's the dog or the owner, create products that your customers love and let us help with, the complexities of getting those products to customers on marketplaces. So
Wow.
we
So
handle, yeah.
that's a super strong value prop. You're like, hey, excuse me, Miss e-commerce brand, would you like us to give you $1 million and you give us a bunch of product and then we'll be friends? It's like, how? Like, who's going to say no to that?
I know it's interesting. It was actually, kind of genius. Our founders, I don't think, I don't know that was when they first started the company, they didn't have a proven track record. And so I think in order to get brands to take a chance on them, part of it, they were like, okay, you don't believe me, I'll buy your inventory and I'll prove it to you how well this works. And so that was sort of the genesis. But over time, it's ended up being this amazing, advantage for us. And I think just, again, the alignment of incentives and the fact that really, we only win when our brand partners win, I think is a very, very powerful value proposition. But, it doesn't come without risk, certainly. We have to make sure that our brand partners are the right fit. Not everyone is. But it is a really funny, again, I don't know that was like a terribly intentional at the time, but it ended up being one of those things that has been such a gift and such a wonderful business model and has had so many advantages as we've grown and scaled.
And is that how most of your clients start with that model, or do you find more of them coming for the software or the fulfillment or other?
Right now, that's how we work with the majority of our brand partners, but more and more, some of those other, products and services are growing. And so, or they might say, hey, we actually have a really skilled Amazon team, but we really don't know how to get into TikTok Shop, right? Like social commerce, I think, is one of the biggest trends in e-commerce right now. It's one of the fastest growing e-commerce channels. And so, it's just a different set of competencies. I think the content creation requirements are just a completely different animal. And so a brand might say, hey, like we actually have our Amazon business under control, but can you help us get a TikTok shop started, right? Like, and with that comes our fulfillment expertise and kind of content creation expertise. And so, we're a little bit agnostic as to how a brand wants to work with us. We are kind of like, hey, here's everything we can do. What do you need? Like, what's going to be most helpful to you? Because we feel really confident that we can solve, across a broad range of challenges.
How many marketplaces are there these days? Because I mean, there's Amazon, obviously, but I think Walmart now is their own little marketplace. Like, how many are there? Is there
worldwide? I believe there's hundreds, but we sell in more than 60 marketplaces across the world.
So that's a really easy. It's like, so, okay, I'm not in China, or my China sales are negligible, but hey, I'd like to get into China. I'll take your $1 million. I'll give you a bunch of my product and like return me some profit. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's how it's designed to work.
That's really, that's super cool.
It is very interesting, marketing and selling something where, our target customer isn't actually paying us anything. We're paying them. It's just, it's a very different, it's a very different selling motion. So it's very interesting. Yeah, it's fun.
That's another headline. It's like how this unicorn grew by paying their customers. Pay your customers first. No, that's really cool.
It makes it sound, I will say, it makes it sound a lot easier than it actually is. But
well, I'm sure sometimes, I mean, you must lose. You can't win on every deal, right? So there must be deals where you kind of lose or you break even.
Well, that's actually what's made, marketing super, super interesting, because not everyone, not all brands are the perfect fit for that model. If, for example, for things that are super expensive to ship, right? That might create a bunch of risk for us. And we might say, hey, like this is just, that particular model doesn't work, but we would love to work with you in other ways. But with that, we spend a lot more of our, marketing budget on, let me say it differently. We're not actually looking to create a huge amount of inbound demand, because a lot of that demand we may or may not want to actually fill, right? And so that's why we invest so much in our events programs and say, hey, we are very, very targeted in terms of who we want to work with. It is really, really important that we speak to them in a way that resonates and that doesn't feel spammy and that feels very personalized and that feels very empathetic. And then we are creating these like more bespoke experiences. So it definitely changes the approach. We do a lot more account-based marketing than we do, really, really broad, trying to just create a bunch of inbound leads that, again, may or may not be a fit for our business model.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Cause I mean, if the product is a dog, or if there's, expensive to ship and a high return rate, right? But yeah, I mean, that's still pretty risky because you don't really know what the return rate might be.
Well, we do have a lot of data that helps us make smart decisions. So,
oh, I see. You can see that in your data set.
We have 37 trillion e-commerce data points. So yes, we have a lot of data that helps us make, and I'm not saying we always get it exactly right. But we do have a lot of data points that help us make, I think, good, smart decisions.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and it makes total sense. Like, you're not spending $1 million a month on paid search or paid social. It's like you've got, a very probably small list of target accounts, maybe 100 or 500 or something. And you're proactively going after them. But how does that look? Like, what's your ABM program? How's it broken out by geo, by vertical, is it mostly automated or mostly one-on-one? Like, just tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, it's more like it's more in the thousands than in the hundreds. So we do, e-commerce is a huge, huge market segment. And so we do have a pretty big TAM, but to your point, it is really quite well defined. And so, as I think about our marketing mix, I mean, we certainly invest in, awareness, and, we have an amazing comms and PR team that is thinking about how do we tell our corporate story. And we want to get people to our website, obviously. So yes, we do invest, a part of our marketing mix is in sponsored search and, trying to get an SEO and trying to get folks to our website so that they can be on that learning journey. But from an outreach perspective is again, we're very content forward. And so one of our, I think, strategic advantages as a company is the fact that we have so many incredible e-commerce experts. And so with that, we try to use them, right? We try to either using them as spokespeople or using them to kind of inform content. So whether that's, a white paper or whether that's a webinar that they can kind of lead a discussion around, we do put a lot of emphasis on events, digital and in person, and then doing a lot of targeted outreach to try to get our target accounts to those events so that they can, just that they can learn. And it's not like hey, come, we're going to solve all your problems, but it's more like, hey, we think this is probably a topic that's like pretty, I talked about the Amazon like annual vendor negotiations example. That's one that's super, super timely right now. And so we have a lot of kind of content initiatives around that right now, but thinking about like, hey, how can we really engage these target accounts? And then our paid digital is more about how do we drive, how are we driving some awareness and whether that is pattern awareness or kind of awareness of some of these events that we're putting on.
Yeah. I'm like a search and a performance marketing guy. And so my search brain is in the background here. And there's definitely some distinct language that your target audience will use that, your average e-com shop or your small one won't use. So like Amazon, when you said Amazon vendor negotiations, like that's probably something that if somebody's Googling that, like chances are they could be decent for you.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Or like even, we have advertising technology that's patented. And so that's another one where it's like, hey, again, that might not, like, our business model might not be the right fit for everyone, and that's okay. But we at least want, if someone's looking for a solution for advertising technology, we at least want them to come learn more about Pattern, and say, okay, is this type of solution, is an e-commerce accelerator, is an e-commerce accelerator the right solution for me? And is Pattern the right e-commerce accelerator for me? Or they might say, hey, like, I would actually rather go with an agency to manage my Amazon advertising. Again, there are different solutions depending on how the brand kind of wants to solve that particular problem. And there are trade-offs, to all of them. But certainly there are a number of things where we think we add tremendous value, and we want brands to know what their options are.
100%. So I got to ask it. It's the obligatory question of 2025, but how are you guys using AI or planning to use AI in your marketing and outbound efforts?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And, I think it's one that's, it's an interesting one, given that we've been talking a lot about empathy and showing an understanding of, pain points and kind of challenges that our audience is experiencing. Because on one hand, I think AI has tremendous potential to make us so much more efficient and to take a huge number of data points and condense them into something you can use, whether that's an email, whether that is a piece of content, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, I think all of us have probably gotten emails or LinkedIn messages. We're like, okay, this was super obviously written by like ChatGPT, and it is just like not speaking to me at all. What this tells me is that the person wanted it to sound personalized without actually personalizing it, right? So I think the way we're using it on our team is, again, it's really effective as like a first pass, right? Where it's like, hey, if you can, and we have a lot of really talented, engineers and kind of AI experts on the broader Pattern team who are working on products that we go to market with, but they can kind of advise us on kind of some of the prompt engineering. And so where we're using it a lot is kind of like a first pass, right? It's like, hey, how can we get to a starting point that feels pretty good, but then we are still having a human, and whether that is, content marketer or a copywriter or a designer or, whoever it is, to kind of go through and say, okay, this got me a first draft, but let me actually go through and make it, does this pass a sniff test? Does this sound like a human wrote it or would say it? So I think, again, from like an efficiency perspective, it's super, super valuable. I am not at a point where I feel super comfortable saying like, hey, AI generate it, set it and forget it. It's like, it's a great tool for getting from 0 to 1. It's if you're trying to actually appear human and empathetic, I don't think it's quite there yet, is my opinion.
Yeah. No, I feel you. A couple of just random ideas that I have for you guys. One is, if you remember the idea of like, hey, what could we do that's like really, really valuable for our clients? AI could be a good like brainstorming partner for that. It's like, hey, AI, we've got 1,000 clients. Here's what they look like, right? Like, here's our typical points of contact. Here are some assets that we have in this data, or do these, just sort of describe the whole thing and be like, give me 10 ways that I could add like extraordinary value, ranked by like how much it would cost. So like cheapest ones first.
Totally. Oh, I love that.
That could be pretty cool.
I love that idea. Yeah. We've actually used it a couple of times to just get like some creative juices going on like feature names, So sometimes you're like, wow, that's really terrible. And other times you're like, I think I could work with that. So it's kind of been fun to use it, to experiment a little bit with it. We're launching a lot of new things. And so, it feels like pretty often we have folks being like, hey, can you help us with a name for that thing? And so, we do turn to AI for that, for some inspiration.
So last question I've got for you. And I know we're close on time here. But looking forward to the future, is there anything new and novel or fun or cool that you guys are planning on testing or rolling out?
Yeah. So this is, I don't know if this is necessarily novel, but it's new for us. I think a lot of times in B2B marketing, I do feel like the emotional element is often ignored, right? Where it's like, oh, it doesn't need to be funny or witty. It's a B2B. It's boring marketing. And I could not disagree with that less. And so I think as we were, it's been really, really fun. As Pattern's grown and as we've launched new products and services, we did kind of a big brand project over the last year. And as we were really focused on the brand architecture and the brand visuals, I think a number of us were looking at it and thinking, our voice and tone really also needs an upgrade, and it needs to align more with how we see ourselves, which is really approachable and, smart, but not intimidating, and, kind of witty and a little bit funny and a little bit nerdy. And, we were just finding their voice and tone didn't match. What we thought of as our voice and tone and who we were didn't actually match what we were putting out there. And so we just hired our first ever creative copywriter on the team to bring in-house, with more than, decades of agency experience. And it's just been so fun in a B2B environment to say we can make our copy and our ads just really fun and emotional. And so, that may or may not be super novel, but it's been kind of a step change for us. And it just makes it's like we're still marketing to people with problems and challenges that they're trying to solve. And it's really fun for them too. And so that's been something I've found so delightful. You can make this B2B marketing feel really magical and really special. Just that's what really lights me on fire.
Totally. Yeah, no, I dig that. And I think that is exciting. I'm a lover of copywriting. And I remember the first moment that I realized it was actually before we started the agency. I basically had this website that I was growing and building and driving traffic to. And I remember one day I changed the headline of the website, and basically the income from that website went up 30% overnight. And I was like, dude, so I was 20 years old at the time. And I'm like, dude, so you're telling me I can just put different words here and make more money? Like what? And ever since then, I've been a student.
I think I'm onto something.
Yeah, that's wild. Cool. Well, this has been really awesome. I've really enjoyed it. You gave me a lot of ideas. One thing that I think everybody can, there are several takeaways from this that I think everybody can take a book out of. One is just hey, how can we really over deliver on value versus hey, how can we drive more leads? I think pretty much anybody, B2Bs, B2Cs, anybody listening could benefit from even just sitting down and thinking about that. Even if you don't do anything about it, it expands your mind toward empathy, I think. But then the other thing that I'm going to take away is hey, how can I sweeten up my own offer, right? Every B2B, in B2Cs, the offer is king, right? They really think a lot about the offer and they try to make it irresistible. In B2B, it's usually request a demo or, just some sort of not that valuable offer. But your offer is very hard to resist, right? And so that's what I'm walking away thinking about is how can we, and also for our clients, help them develop more juicy offers. I mean, I don't think we'll ever get to a point where hey, I'll give you $1 million, but it's, something to strive toward, right? Even a couple steps in that direction could really change the game. So thank you for that. I really enjoyed it. For folks listening, if you enjoyed it, if you got any ideas here today, or if you were inspired, drop us a like, drop us a comment, share this with a friend, pay it forward. We really appreciate that. And Carolyn, where can folks find you if they want to learn more about you or Pattern?
You can find more out about Pattern at pattern.com. And then find me on LinkedIn. I love to connect.
Very cool. All right, we'll stay on the line just one moment. We will wrap, but for everybody else, that was another awesome episode of Revenue Driven CMO, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Revenue Driven CMO. We really appreciate you being here. For more details, show notes, past episodes, head over to revenuedrivencmo.com. This show is brought to you by Level Agency, combining AI-enabled performance marketing expertise with the right mix of data and creativity to fuel growth. Catch you next week.